Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over that snowstorm in parts of the Midwest, which is going to be taking place for Thursday, Friday, and especially so through the weekend. We will have quite a bit of snow accumulating, especially in parts of North Dakota and northern Minnesota, but the real questions are going to come further to the south. We're still trying to figure out how far east that heaviest band of snow will move. What will it move into areas like Minneapolis, or will it stay into parts of central Minnesota? That's something that we're still trying to figure out, and we're also trying to see whether or not some of that snow, which will probably start falling from the air in areas like Iowa and Wisconsin, will actually stick to the ground or not. So we're going to be discussing those issues today. We won't have the snowfall forecast for this storm in today's video, but probably by tomorrow or Thursday we'll have that out on the channel, and then we'll also have a bit of a discussion on the snowstorm as well over the next couple of videos. We're also going to be briefly talking about the next storm, which will be moving into this same area. So before we get into it, let's start off with the weather photo of the day. This one was sent in by Steve, and this was from 2003 in central Maryland. So again, if you guys have any older photos from anything related to the weather, you can certainly send that in. It does not have to be anything that's current, although I do prefer if they are current photos, especially with things like snow or any storms, anything like that. I would prefer if it's current, because it can get a little bit confusing, especially for people who are just looking at the picture and think that it's related to some other storm. So if it's something like clouds or sunset or anything like that, feel free to show something that was taken a few years ago. But when it comes to something like a storm picture, I'd recommend that you guys keep it to the current storm photos, just so that nobody really gets too confused. Now, taking a look at this, you can see the unusual pattern in the cloud. The one on the right was taken about a minute and a half after the one that's on the left. So this one was about a minute and a half earlier than the one on the right hand side of the screen. And what you can see is the clouds kind of dispersing a little bit compared to the one on the right. So I'm not sure what actually caused this. He was saying and this was, by the way, taken by Steve from Central Maryland. I forgot to say that, but he has a lot of great photos. He sends them in. And personally, I really do like his photos because, again, they are not really storm-related photos, but they're just unusual things. He sent in one of cobwebs on a plant with dew on them, and that's something that personally I've never seen, and it did look cool when he did photograph it. He also had a cool picture of, I believe, a mine in central Maryland where with all the fall foliage and the fall colors. So he sends in some really great photos, and if you guys have any photos like this that you want to send in, feel free to do so. But again, I'm not quite sure what caused this. He was saying that potentially it might have been a plane contrail from the plane moving through, but he said he hasn't seen anything like this since, and he would assume that if it was a plane moving over, then that would probably be more common, and it might just be something to do with how the local environment was interacting with each other. You might have saw maybe some sort of boundary zone set up over your area, and you might have seen potentially warmer air coming down or coming up from the lower parts of the atmosphere and colder air sinking, and with that happening, you could have seen maybe a little demarcation line where you had some of those clouds develop. So really cool photo here from Steve. If you guys want to send in your photos, send them over to elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com, and just say a general area of where you took yours from. So like Steve did, you just have to write something like Central Maryland is where he took this one from. It does not have to be anything specific. It does not have to be a town name, nothing like that. It could literally just be your state name, or just any general location. Nothing really specific, but just so that we can get a decent idea of where the photo was taken from. So let's start off with the watches and warnings. You can see it is actually quite quiet today. We have a few winter storm warnings in western Washington. We have one winter weather advisory also in Washington, and then a few more in Wyoming, Montana, and even a tiny part of Colorado. But other than that, really no other major watches or warnings. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 91 degrees in Coolidge, Arizona, as well as 4 miles southeast of Fountain Hills, Arizona. Low temperature was around 0 degrees, 14 miles west southwest of McKay, Idaho. This is a high elevation plateau in central Idaho where you do have really high mountains, and then you have valleys which are still quite high in elevation. So the valleys are actually much colder in most scenarios than the mountaintops themselves, because you can kind of see, you can kind of get some of that colder, denser air to kind of just sink into the valleys. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes you end up getting the valleys to be maybe a few degrees colder than the higher peaks. I know that happens in areas like Western Virginia, for example. They get colder in the valleys, and then the higher elevation spots maybe are even a few degrees warmer on some scenarios. So it's interesting how that happens, and that is why they were so cold this morning compared to the surrounding areas. We also had a highest rainfall report in Woodland, Washington, of 1.63 inches of rain, and the high snowfall report was 14 miles west of Nye, Montana, where they got 5 inches of snowfall. So let's start off, or let's actually start talking about this storm. I put on the contour lines, and originally I was not going to do that. I was just going to show the plain radar map, and I was going to get rid of these lines on the map, which I do have the ability to do, but I didn't want to do that just because I think the seeing where the low pressure is, where the high pressure is in this scenario is going to be a lot more useful than just looking at a surface map and then talking about it. It's going to make it a lot easier for you guys, especially just to kind of see what's happening on the screen. So we have this system coming out of central Canada. So we have Manitoba up here. We have Saskatchewan. There's Ontario. So that's giving you a general idea of where over Canada we are. We have Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana right here. And these are going to be the areas that are going to start off with the snow. So we're going to have areas in northern and eastern North Dakota start off with a little bit of mix and snow, but for the most part it's going to be rain. So it's going to stay fairly rainy for these areas. Nothing in terms of wintry precipitation up to this point. But as you can see, by Wednesday late in the evening, or maybe even Thursday very early in the morning, we start to get a little bit of a break in terms of snow and maybe even a little bit of mixed precipitation in northern Minnesota. Now, none of this would even start to stick or even come close to starting to stick by this point. Your low pressure system is in Iowa. So this is going to be an interesting system because you have a really abundant source of cold air on the backside. So you have cold air piling up on the western edge of the storm. So that means that wherever this system is, you have to go maybe 50 miles to the west, and then you'll start to get in on the below 32 degree temperatures. So just as an example, when this system moves further to the east and it, let's say, ends up in northern Wisconsin, we'll now look at where the back edge of that cold air would be. It would be right in here into Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. So with the moving of this storm further to the east, it's going to allow this shallow cold air to wrap around on the back end and pretty much produce a little bit of snowfall. It'll be very light for most of the time, but it will be snow nonetheless, and it will be something that might actually start to accumulate at a decent clip. So this is by Thursday morning. It will be windy over these areas, so that's something that, again, a lot of people are just looking at the snowfall maps. When you look at the contour lines, you can see how tight and packed together they are. So when you have that, that's indicating that you have a sharp pressure gradient, and with sharp pressure gradients comes a abundance of wind and really high wind. So I don't think this is going to be one of those super windy type of events, but I would watch out for maybe winds gusting up near 20, 25, 30 miles per hour at times. And when you combine that with potentially some snow on the back end, or even driving rain, so when you have the wind combined with the rain, that can also just cause some issues. So especially if you're going to be driving along some of these interstates, or even just on some of these roads, just make sure that you probably want to do that during the daytime, at least if you are going to be out on the roads. Driving at night in the snow with the wind, probably not the greatest idea. So just plan out your Thursday accordingly, because Thursday, Friday, and maybe even lingering into early Saturday will be a bit of a mess on the roads depending on where you are. So here's when the storm starts to wrap around itself. You can see that we started with the system over in central Iowa, and now look where it is. It's about to cross over the Mississippi into Wisconsin. So it's made a fairly decent jump into Minnesota by this point. It's now going to continue to move on to the northeast. And like I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago, with that coming further to the east, the cold air will also be able to wrap around into areas like the Dakotas and eventually into Minnesota and Iowa. So again, the system's continuing to move to the north, and once it moves up near that Lake Superior region, this is when all that snow starts to pile down. Now, I don't want to forget about you guys up in Canada. Just to point out a couple of areas, Thunder Bay up in Ontario. I think you guys will be right on that mix of rain and snow. It's actually going to be a fairly similar forecast to Duluth, Minnesota. So these areas right along Lake Superior on the northern end of Lake Superior will probably be a little bit more on the rainy side, at least through Thursday. And then by Fridays, when it might start to maybe turn a little bit colder, but at least for the start of the storm, it should be maybe in the rainy side of things. Once you get inland, though, so for areas like Winnipeg, up in Manitoba, even into parts of southern Saskatchewan, you guys will probably get in on some of the snowfall fairly early on. So the snow might even start through Wednesday evening, but I think the main consistent, decent, light to moderate snowfall is going to start up right around Thursday early afternoon. Now, that's going to continue, and it's going to actually start to pour down further to the south. So look at where this low pressure system was. We were down again in Iowa, then we moved up near the Mississippi, the Minnesota, Wisconsin border, and then we kind of made a little bit of a turn. We went up into Lake Superior, and then we eventually went back up to Minnesota. So this system has taken a really interesting turn, and because the storm is now all the way up here, that means that the cold air can wrap around not only on the western edge, but also on the southern edge of the system as well. So you do have this little warm sector, which is going to be right here. This is where it's probably going to be all rain, and you can see that some major metro areas like Duluth and Thunder Bay will get stuck under that warm sector, at least for Thursday evening. So while you might go inland and you might get west of Duluth, you might get west of the coastal part of Lake Superior, and you'll start to get in on some snowfall. But once you get right along that coast or that shoreline, that's where it will start to get a little bit more rainy. Moving this through Thursday evening and even into Friday morning, the storm is now continuing to make that circle. So again, it started in Iowa, moved through Minnesota, moved into Wisconsin, moved into Lake Superior area, and then by this point is all the way up into northern Minnesota. So pretty interesting track up to this point, where we've seen the system make a complete loop around itself, and that snow is going to continue throughout Friday. So by this point, still in northern Minnesota with that low pressure center, and you can see it's continuing to drive itself further to the south. So this system is spinning around, and eventually you're going to actually see that this one ends up right back through Wisconsin again. So it's doing a complete 360, and then it's going to loop itself back through central Wisconsin, and it'll eventually depart and weaken after that. But again, you can see all that snow, and also, again, the wind. I do want to stress that it will be windy during this event. Friday early morning, look at how tightly packed together all these isobars are, and all these contours on the map are. You're going from a 993 thickness to about 1,028 or 1,030 right in western North Dakota. So within this area, you have to go down about 40 millibars, and that's a relatively small area when we're talking about meteorology. So in order to see that, you're going to need to have some sort of method to release all that extra energy, and in this case, that's going to come in the form of snow and also in the form of wind. So that wind is going to continue to be produced. The 32-degree line by this point is in western Minnesota and all the way down into Nebraska. So these areas are all getting the snow sticking to the ground, and I would not even be surprised if some of this snow down in southern Minnesota or northern Iowa is starting to stick as well. Here's the low pressure center. Again, it's all the way over here by this point. So it started here, moved all the way up here, and then eventually made a loop back around to exactly where we started once again. So it's interesting how that happens. But by this point, by Friday evening, it is starting to weaken. But for those of you who live in and around Lake Superior, this is when you would start to get in on some of your snowfall, because it will be cold enough on the back edge. But the thing is it going to be too dry? Are you now stuck in that dry sector, which also runs ahead of the storm, which would be right here? Are you going to get stuck in there, or are maybe you going to be just on that northern or on that southern edge of that of the precipitation, and maybe you can get in on some of the snow? So these are a couple questions for some localized areas that we still have to figure out, and that's why I'm not putting out my snowfall forecast just yet. You can see that system moves down to the south and might bring some amount of snow in the form of very light flurries into Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin. Again, I'm not expecting too much to stick throughout that region. So here's what the European model does in terms of snowfall over that entire period. This is through Saturday morning, but just to mention, by Saturday evening, we'll have another storm, which is going to start up in Saskatchewan and move down into North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota. So it's going to follow a very similar track, but it'll be a little bit lighter, and it'll also be a little bit quicker. We will talk about that storm in a couple days, but as of right now, we're going to solely focus on this first system. You can see that the model is producing quite a bit of snowfall. We're looking at about 4 to 10 inches of snowfall throughout northern North Dakota, northern Minnesota, and then you can also see that pretty much every model, we're going to go through a couple here, but pretty much every model has this little stripe through the eastern Dakotas and then western Minnesota, where they have a bit of extra snowfall. They have 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 inch amounts. And the reason that is because you have that system looping around Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, which means that the warm sector is on that eastern edge, but the colder part of the storm on the northwestern end is going to be in western Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, eastern North Dakota. So these areas are where you're going to be getting that snow to pile up. Now, for my folks up in Canada, for Saskatchewan, southern Saskatchewan, especially southeastern Saskatchewan, it looks like you could maybe get in on about 2 to 5 inches of snowfall, and that could even in some easternmost areas get up near 6 to 10 inches of snow. I think Winnipeg, areas like that in southern Manitoba, and then also western Ontario will be pretty much the bullseye area. You guys could be getting as much as 10 to 20 inches of snowfall according to some current model projections. So that is something that at least you want to pay some amount of attention to. Even if some of these numbers are maybe a couple inches overdone, you're still looking at a decent amount of snow that will have to be shoveled. So probably make your plans around Thursday and Friday, so make sure you have those days cleared open, because you don't want to have anything going on while it's going to be heavy snowing during those spots. And it's not necessarily just going to be how heavy it's coming down, it's going to be the duration. It's going to be a very long type of event that'll last 24 to 48 hours. So that's going to be also one of the reasons that it starts to pile up. If we look at the GFS model, you can see it is quite similar, although it is lower on the southern end of the storm. You're not dealing with as much snow there, and overall it's not showing as much snow for these areas, probably just by a couple inches. The European does overdo some of these snowfall amounts, so in terms of the actual amounts, I think I'm going a little bit closer to the GFS, but in terms of placement, I'm agreeing more with the European. If we look at the RGEM or the Canadian model, the high resolution one is now out, so we can look at that. And I do like this map a little bit more, because on the Canadian model, they actually show the counties, so that'll make it a lot easier for those of you who live here in these areas to figure out where exactly we're looking at. So again, you can see that stripe of 2 to 6 inches throughout here. Again, the European model is a little bit overdone on the amount of snowfall, so I will say that. I think 6+ inches likely for parts of Manitoba, Western Ontario, even northern Minnesota. I would say 6+ inches is likely as of right now, but again, that would be that northernmost spot. But for the rest of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, it's looking like a good 2 to 5 inches of snowfall for right now. And then again, you have that question of how much of this down here is actually sticking to the ground. I'm going to say that once you get into Wisconsin, Illinois, southern Iowa, this is not sticking down here. But I would not be surprised if that snow near Minneapolis and southern Minnesota, as well as northern Iowa, might even stick down to the ground. That is definitely a possibility and something that I'm not willing to rule out just yet. The reason this is happening, let's just go through the upper air real quick. That storm, which is over the northwest right now and the Pacific coast, is going to be moving further to the east. So we're going to see this system turn into our snowstorm for the Midwest. So this is for later today. If we move this on to Thursday evening, you can see that that storm is now all the way down into North Dakota, and it's creating a fairly large trough into the central United States, still ridging along the west and east coast by this point. Now, you can also see that we're starting to even get a little bit of our origins of our next system, which is going to be this little wave of energy off the west coast, and this is going to come on to the western part of Canada and eventually dive down into the Midwest. If we move this on, here's your little piece of energy that's going to become your next system. Here's that mega trough into the eastern United States. So once this system moves through the Midwest, we still do have the questions of, do you see potentially a little bit of snowfall from this event or maybe even the next event in areas like the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, even up the Appalachians and into the Northeast. So there are still questions. I think the second system has more potential in the east, especially to get some snowfall, but we still have those questions, and those are still things that we're trying to iron out and figure out. This is by Saturday morning, so that system is already approaching the Midwest, the second one. So we have that first system. That's what we're talking about in today's video, but that second one is going to come through on Saturday evening, and you might get another 2 or 3 inches, which is going to be fairly annoying because it's not like you're really adding to the scenery. You already have the snow on the ground, so if you like the snow appearance, it's not really going to change anything. It's just going to mean that you're going to have to get the snowblower out once again. So it's really more going to be an annoying and nuisance type of storm. It's not going to be that much snow. It's going to come overnight, so you're not even going to see it. So you're going to have to wake up in the morning on Monday, or actually on Sunday, and probably shovel that additional snowfall out as well. So we're definitely getting into the swing of things in terms of winter. We should be seeing snowfall by this point, and we're finally getting back to normal in terms of seeing snowfall and seeing cold air. So it's at least looking like a fairly active mid and late November. Let's see if that carries through December. We are going to have a couple more updates on the system, so if you guys have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below. If you have any weather photos that you want to send in, send them over to my email address. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.